Welcome back. I hope you've taken the time in the interim to think about some monopolies that you know of. The one I'm thinking of, I'll drop into the video notes, but it is the De Beer Diamond Company. And when we think about a monopoly as a single firm that sells a product without close substitutes, where there are barriers to entry in this marketplace, and therefore the firm has the ability to set the price of their good, I want you to think whether or not this company matches those definitions for you. Because certainly we can think of substitutes for diamonds, but do people accept them as a close substitute? So with that in mind, let's start to think about what some of these natural barriers to entry are. Is it controlling resources, so the actual supply of diamonds, owning the mines? Is it problems raising capital? So if we think about that example of the Lynchburg City Hillcats, sure, I could build another baseball team here to compete with them, but I would need to build a new stadium, hire a team, hire coaches, hire managers. It would take a lot. Or is it a problem of economies of scale? So companies or firms with very high fixed costs that when you increase output, those fixed costs approach zero. And another word for this is a natural monopoly. So we tend to think of electricity distribution as a natural monopoly. Here in Virginia, we only have one firm, AEP, American Electric Power. I should say Central and Southern Virginia. Dominion Energy is up further north. But what that produces is a natural monopoly because this single firm has lower costs than any potential competitor. We can also see government-created barriers where there is a law or regulation that prevents other people from joining the market. So we might think of licensing, where there's an exclusive right to sell a good or service. Doctors are licensed. We might think this as having some pros because it might minimize those negative externalities, but it might also have some cons where it limits the supply of, in this case, doctors, so consumers have less of a choice and might otherwise pay a higher price. Another con to licensing might be that it encourages people to cheat. So because it's so hard to become a doctor and because it affords such high rents, you might say cheat your way into med school or otherwise set up a black market for medical services. We can also think about patentings, which are literally government-issued monopolies. So we have patents on drugs. What this does is create an incentive to invest in R&D, research and development, but there might be some unintended consequences, such as music being tightly controlled by studio copyrights. Just to recap, we've got these characteristics of a true monopoly, which is one seller in the marketplace selling a unique product, or at least a product without close substitutes, creating high barriers to entry. And because there's one firm without close substitutes where there are barriers to entry in this market, either governmental or otherwise created, this monopolist has the ability to set their own price. They are a price maker as opposed to a price taker that we had in that last chapter. So to continue to compare these two market structures, perfectly competitive firms have price takers, which cannot affect the price. They cannot influence the price. They take the price as given, whereas monopolists can set the price, and the way they set the price is by choosing that output level. We'll see this when we look at demand curves in a second. So, if a perfectly competitive firm is a price taker and cannot affect the price, what does their demand curve look like? Well, it's perfectly elastic. Again, think about what would happen if a perfectly competitive firm priced up here. Well, no one would buy it, and everyone would go to that perfectly elastic demand curve. And what would happen if a perfectly competitive firm priced down here? Well, they would be producing so far below their cost that they would be out of business. But a monopolist does have ability to set their price. So what does this mean? Since they're the only producer in the market, their demand curve is going to be the market demand curve. And we know that market demand curves are downward sloping. Since a monopolist influences the price, the more it produces, the lower the price of that good. Similarly, the higher price the monopolist charges, the fewer of this good, the less of this good it's going to sell. And whether the monopolist charges a relatively high price or a relatively low price is going to depend on the elasticity of demand, how sensitive we are as consumers to changes in price. So how is the monopolist going to price? How are they going to choose that level of output? Well, this is true regardless of market structure, but they are going to set their output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This was true under perfect competition. It's just that under perfect competition, with that perfectly elastic demand curve, price was marginal revenue. Since the monopolist is the only firm in the market, its marginal revenue depends on what price it decides to charge. Its output is going to change the price in the market. We saw that the last slide with that downward sloping demand curve for the individual firm. But keep in mind, since there's only one firm in this market, the monopolist's demand curve is the market demand curve. So with that in mind, let's press pause on our videos and we'll regroup in the next one to look at what the marginal revenue for a monopolist looks like.